Thank you, early risers, for joining us, and hello to anyone back east. You probably should go to bed by now, but I'm glad that you are not in bed and you're here with us instead. My name is Greg Barber. I'm the director of digital news projects at the Washington Post.
And I'm Marc Lavalley. I'm the editor of interactive news at the New York Times.
And we're here to talk about the Coral Project. The Coral Project is a collaboration between the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Mozilla Foundation. We're funded by a grant from the Knight Foundation in the United States. And our goal is to help publishers create, curate, enliven communities around their journalism. And we're looking to do that through open source software and renewed best practices. And so, believe it or not, the Coral Project's been around for a couple of years now, and this is the first time that Marc and I are actually doing this together. So you have the Washington Post and the New York Times here in the same room.
This is a first.
Yes, yes. So collaboration is live, everyone. But we've been working very closely together for the past 2 years, getting this project together, getting it off the ground, and what we're going to show you today. Today we'll talk a little bit about how the project came together and what we aim to accomplish. And then we'll actually show you some of the software that we've created. We have a demo of our first product. It's called Trust, and we're really excited about it. But I guess first, Marc, what got us here? What were some of the problems? Yeah.
Actually, I'm curious, very quickly, a show of hands of who has heard of the Coral Project before? Okay, that's good. Yeah. So what got us here? Yeah. We've been fighting the same problems in our own newsrooms, I think like many of you, for a long time, where, for what, 15, 20 years, we've had, comments attached to articles and so on, and kind of after that initial push, it hasn't really progressed much. So I think in some places, like the Times, to maintain a reasonable level of quality, we've invested a lot in human moderation. So we have a team of about 15 moderators who approve every single comment that goes up on our site. And in order to make that happen, it means that we can only open discussion on a subset of the articles that we produce every day. And that is really only on articles, right? So we don't have other open-ended discussions or sort of places where our readers can connect with each other outside the context of a news story. And so when you're trying to get reporters to engage more, with readers and things like that, and you have sort of this software that you built some number of years ago, and it maybe isn't the best thing in the world, and you can never sort of get anybody to work on it, and things like that. It's really hard to then turn around and convince a reporter, hey, there's all this great stuff happening here. This could be really useful for your reporting assignments and for your beat and things like that, because meanwhile, on their phone, they have Twitter, and people can just tweet at them, and it shows up, and they can just tweet right back, and sort of like, why am I going to go into this comments thing from the 1990s? And so, I think what is really promising, though, is that, in some projects, working with individual reporters, particularly around beats that they're covering for a long period of time, it could start to really show them the promise of actually engaging with their readers. And we had a couple of real successes with this, particularly around healthcare in the United States and all that's changed about that in the past couple of years. And when you do that work and you essentially flip a reporter, they become really invested in the community that they've built, and it's really promising. So we've been able to sort of see the promise of putting that effort in, but without some sort of larger project, we can't do that at scale.
Yeah. Well, and at the Washington Post, we had similar challenges. As Marc was saying, at the New York Times, comments are pre-moderated. There's a team of moderators in-house that manages those discussions. At the Washington Post, we take a different approach. We have comments on most of our articles. Our comments are post-moderated, which is not branding. It is that they are moderated after the fact. So commenters add their 2 cents onto a story, and then there's a moderation effort that takes place after those comments are added. And so the challenge that you have there is civility and quality control. And it's a challenge that we've been fighting at the Post for a while. We have a lot of successes when it comes to our digital community. We have some communities that have cropped up around one of our weather blogs, the Capital Weather Gang, around our advice columnist Carolyn Hacks, around one of our national reporters, Joel Achenbach. He has a community that's been around for about 10 years, and his commenters are among our most loyal users. We have communities around politics, around a legal blog, around sports, but the difficulty that we've had is really scaling our moderation efforts because we're trying to have communities in so many places, and because that work is so difficult. And so colleagues of ours, and then shortly thereafter us, we got together and started talking about this, because it turned out that even though the Post and the Times had come at this from very different angles, at the time, the Times still has its own in-house comment software. The Post at the time was using a vendor. So really we were taking very different approaches. But we were still sort of in the same place, which was we were spending a lot of time, spending a lot of money, and unhappy with the results. And so that's what brought us together as the Coral Project.
Which happened at a conference, right?
That's right.
It was something like this. It's sort of like the version of this in the United States.
Yeah.
And my old boss, Aaron Philhofer, who's here somewhere,
Yes.
and Corey Hike from the Post were in a hallway in between sessions, just ranting about this whole problem.
Yeah.
And so it was like, well, why don't we work together?
Right. Well,
Which to underscore this, I mean, the Post and the Times don't really work together
No.
on things. This is what, Montagues and Capulets?
Right, yeah.
I think it took a number of meetings.
Yeah.
We went down to Washington. They
Yeah.
came up to New York. We get
Yeah.
everybody in a room together,
Yeah.
get the top editors in, and had to sort of like feel it out a little bit. Went on 3 or 4 dates.
That's right. And with multiple people at my organization, that first conversation happened with Corey. There was another one that happened with Melissa Bell, who's now at Vox. And then it finally got to me, because it was the product that I was actually working on, and same with Marc, who was working on the interactive news team at the time. And so by the time we were finally talking turkey, it was us in the room, and yeah, it was a really interesting process, because these are two organizations that are competitors, or strong competitors. But this was a space where we realized that we didn't need to compete, not on the technology. On what we do with the technology, sure, but on the actual technology, we thought not only could we help each other, but potentially we could start, hopefully, a movement that could help journalists around the world, at large organizations, small organizations, niche organizations, to think about their communities in a different way, and perhaps provide tools that could help them actually reinvent them.
Yeah, I mean, you think about WordPress and its role in sort of publishers' operations, where a small publication of one person can use WordPress, all the way up to an organization the size of the New York Times or the Washington Post, where we both also use WordPress, and everything in between. And we're not competing on building a version of WordPress, right? We all just use it, and we sort of compete with the stories that we produce through it. And so I think what we're trying to do. This is a lofty goal, right, to sort of try to build a WordPress for comments or anything like that. Our ambitions are a little bit more tempered. But what we want to do is sort of solve the problem the same way, that there can be something out there that provides the foundation for a single person publisher, all the way up to our organizations.
Yeah, and in that origin story, by the way, we have to mention our two partners that are not here today, but we represent them in spirit. The Mozilla Foundation, which has been tremendously helpful. Dan Sinker is the third member of our troika, and they joined the project as we were thinking about turning this into an open source project rather than just a collaboration between the Post and the Times. And Dan and the Mozilla team have been essential in ensuring that that we're thinking we've got the sort of best practices of open source in mind. And that we're moving in a way that really puts the needs of users at the center of our thinking. And then, of course, also the Knight Foundation, our funders, who have been supportive from day one, from the highest ranks in the organization to the people who work with us regularly, to their PR shop, which kindly tweeted out that we were doing this. So it's really been this tremendous collaborative effort right from the beginning. And I think sort of the other major partner has been the publishing industry. We have been welcomed with open arms at more newsrooms than I can count at the moment. We've talked with more than 300 people at around 150 different news organizations in 30 countries. And we may bring that country count up this weekend. And people in the industry have been so tremendously helpful in talking candidly about their strategy, in giving us ideas, in helping us work through problems. And that has been, I think, the most wonderful part about working on this project. So what are we actually doing?
Yes.
Our goals are, as I mentioned at the top of the conversation, to provide open source software and renewed best practices that can help publishers reimagine their communities. And what we're thinking there, and this actually comes from those interviews and those conversations, and what we're thinking there sort of broadly and strategically, is that communities on news sites have a few fundamental flaws. And I think one of them that Marc mentioned is that the technology was set somewhere around the turn of the century, and it feels as antiquated as that phrase, turn of the century. That we're basically coming at this in the same way that we've been coming at this for a while, in that on a lot of news sites, on a lot of articles, the standard for user engagement is an open field at the bottom of the story with no direction. And so carefully crafted journalism sits at the top, and at the bottom, we don't really know what we want, but we know that we're not happy with it. And so what happens is we leave this open box, and we don't tell our users what we're looking for. We don't give them an idea of what we consider valuable. In fact, in a lot of cases, we don't participate at all in those spaces. And then we're shocked and surprised when what they give us is not what we were looking for, even though we didn't really know what we were looking for.
Yeah, and I think to that aim, we're not just trying to fix the comments box.
That's right.
Right. This is not just, oh, and now here's a free version of Discuss or something like that. I mean, I think there's an opportunity, particularly at this point in time, to really engage in a fundamental shift in the relationship between news organizations and their readers. That this can be much more of a participatory and two-way conversation in an ongoing way, with the types of beats and ongoing stories that organizations cover, especially as many news organizations start to really decide where they want to specialize, where they want to invest their reporting time and resources. In many cases, moving away from just being a sort of general news outlet of sort of putting something on the web and then sort of starting to work on the next day's news report. And that's in sort of trying to build the foundation for that opportunity to flourish in a bunch of different ways for different organizations and in different countries as well. Yeah. I think what we're also really looking at with that is the behavioral shifts that have happened, particularly over the last 5 years, where many, many more people are now comfortable, conversing with their friends and wider networks of people online. But trying to then find a way, to do that in a public space that also feels sort of safe and respectful, and figuring out the right combination of technology to aid that, right, to sort of keep the trolls away, and so on. And then also, to Greg's point, the best practices, right? It's one thing to just have a bundle of software and you install it and you put it on your site and it's like, okay, great. How are you, training the community managers around that? What expectations are you putting in front of readers for sort of like any kind of like sort of sense of civility or code of conduct around that as well? And so in total, I think what we're trying to do over the next year plus is really set up the industry to be able to look at the next generation of this kind of interaction, as opposed to just say, okay, well, here's like a solution to the problem from 15 years ago.
Yeah. And so if there were a few top line items that anyone who's watching could take away from what we've learned so far, one of them is, and number one, way above everything else, is news organizations should have a strategy when it comes to their on-site engagement. It is surprising, maybe, But the most common answer that I get when I ask the question, so what is your strategy for on-site engagement, comments, what have you, the most common answer is a long pause, because a lot of organizations haven't necessarily thought about it that way. I would say that if you're an executive at a news organization, if you're a manager at a news organization, if you have a beat at a news organization and you write articles that have comments on them, you should have an answer to that question. What is your strategy? What do you want out of engaging with users? You can't, I don't think you have license to be unhappy with what users have provided in that space if you haven't done the homework to think about what you actually want in that space. Another thing, look at your analytics. In this space, do it right now. Because what I'm going to tell you is, from having looked at the analytics at the Washington Post and having talked with publishers who have looked at their analytics, your commenters and the people who read your comments and the people who engage with your website in other ways, they take polls, they respond to quizzes, etc. These are your most loyal users. And I think news organizations dismiss these folks at their peril. Because they're the future of our business, and we need to make more of them, not fewer of them. And so I think the challenge when you're looking at civility, if you look at your comments and other engagement spaces and you think, wow, this is not the kind of contribution that we want, the problem isn't the people, the problem is your strategy. And then third, know your users. Know who these people are. Understand them. They are, I can't emphasize it enough, they're your most loyal users. They spend more time on your site. They consume more of your content per session. They're likely to return more often. And if you have a subscription or membership scheme, they are more likely to engage in it. There's research that was published recently out of a publication from MIT that talks about a ladder of engagement. It's interesting, I've heard sort of different takes on that within the journalism industry. One editor that I respect quite a lot was talking about, well, maybe it might not be so much of a ladder of engagement, but a rainbow of engagement, where there are, sort of lots of different ways to sort of get users into the cycle, into the funnel, and kind of become your engaged users. But in any case, what the idea is that's sort of shaking out both scientifically and anecdotally is this notion that if you bring users into your engaged spaces, they will become more engaged, become more loyal, and then perhaps in the end support your publication as it moves through and as it grows as a business.
Yeah. Should we talk about the parts?
Yeah, let's talk about the parts.
Okay, the parts. What are we actually building?
Yeah.
So the end goal is that we have a sort of set of tools that publishers can use either altogether or in part to essentially mediate all of these reader-reporter interactions. So that's comments, shaped things on articles, forums, and so on, and then also user-generated content for any kind of participatory call out, whether that's just feeding reporting in a sort of crowdsourcing way, or whether that's also being presented as a collection of material on the site. So it's a little audacious to start building essentially beta software and then walk into the door to publishers and say, rip out this entire part of your system and replace it with this thing that we just built like last week.
It'll be great.
Even we wouldn't do that, even though they sit right outside my office.
Right.
So what we're trying to do is sort of work up to that by first starting with this piece that Greg was just talking about, that's really looking at understanding your existing community. And so we're calling that trust, and that's what we're going to demo today. So you don't need to replace anything in your existing setup. You can just sort of add this onto the side and start to really become more aware of who is in there. In one of our examples is our crosswords blog. There's a very active community of people who engage every single day, talking to each other about the crossword puzzle and so on. So like, who are these people? Where else do they sort of communicate with each other on the site and so on? Building off of that, the next piece that we're starting to work on now is called Ask, and that's really building the tooling and best practices around crowdsourcing and user-generated content. So that's the kind of thing that you can use. Maybe use it a couple of times a week, maybe use it a couple of times a day to really aid your reporting, but it's something where you're putting specific call-outs out there sort of around news stories or other sort of reporting projects as needed. So it's not really the systemic part of your site. And then building off of both of those experiences later this year is when we're going to start working on the commenting experience itself. So that way we're sort of like easing into publishers' existing systems as opposed to trying to sort of like go in and start ripping things out.
That's right, and we're working with publishers. As you know, so the Post and the Times will be testing the software, and we're also working with publishers around the world to help us in that in various ways. Some will be taking our software and testing it. Others will just be sort of assisting us with strategy and ideas and kind of watching from afar. But we're hoping that the process can be as collaborative and open as possible. We see this as an opportunity to really strike one for the whole industry and solve, hopefully, all of us working together to crowdsource and solve this problem that's been challenging us for so long. And as Marc was saying, and to borrow a line from our project lead, Andrew Lasovsky, we're not looking to build a better comment box. We're looking to think about this space differently. And to all of us as an industry come together and think about how do we want to engage with users? How do users want to engage with us? We're asking them too, and help build the sort of software and practices that will get us there. And I guess we should show you what some of that looks like.
Yes.
So coming up on the screen shortly will be the demo of our first app called Trust, and there it is. So it's in very early beta, and so it's as I've said to some folks that I've demoed this one-on-one to, it is a main course without an appetizer right yet. So to give you a bit more of an idea of what you're seeing here, what we're doing is we're taking actual user data. So not sort of algorithmic projections of what users might do, but actual data that shows what users have done in the past within a news organization site. In this case, the data comes from the Washington Post. This is actual user data from the Washington Post. The names have been changed to protect the innocent, but otherwise the numbers are real. And what this does is it quantifies qualitative decision making. So what's happened at the Post in order to get this data is there were months and years of decisions made by moderators and made by users that show qualitatively the value of different contributions. So how, what were, from each user, what was the number of comments, for example, as you see here under the filters section. What was the number of comments that a user contributed? What were the total number of replies written by that user? So were they just broadcasting, or were they actually engaging with other users? You can find that by looking at numbers like that. Total number of replies received. So were they shouting into the void, or were people actually engaging with them when they spoke? And maybe you don't want to look at whole numbers, right? Maybe instead you want to look at something that's more proportional, so that you can bring in users who have been with you for a very long time and users who have been with you for a short time. In that case, you may want to look at proportional numbers. And so we have a few examples of those here as well. So percentage of comments that are replies. Replies received per comment. So looking at things that can be a little bit more proportional. And we have numbers here that don't connect to just the submission of comments and the submission of replies. So average words per post. So for example, you may be looking for please give me a quick pithy quote right now that I can put on a page because I'm a journalist on a deadline. So you may want to look for users who have contributed somewhat regularly those short, very punchy, very pithy quotes. You could try to find that by taking the average words per post down. You may be looking for a personal anecdote, something that tells more of a personal story. In that case, you may want to look for users whose contributions tend to be a little bit longer. We have qualitative numbers as well, right? So percentage of comments flagged by the system, and system flagged means things like spam or impermissible language. So those kinds of things that a system would automatically reject. But in addition to the filters that you see here, there's a lot of room for this tool to grow. And this is one of the questions that we've asked to folks in the industry and that we would ask to all of you. What kinds of filters would you want to see here? Some of the filters that you don't see yet would be things like percentage of comments deleted by moderators. So what is the actual moderation team, how have they weighed in on this user? The number of likes per user, so qualitative information from users, from the commenting community. And so you can take these different attributes and create a recipe, create a description for the types of users that you'd like to find for different activities. And so that's the next step that you can take. So I'll actually move a few of these knobs so that you can see it's not a screen grab. This is an actual live demo. And you can click on each of these user records and see more information about these users. So again, this is a real Washington Post user. And I'm picking this at random because that's a good idea in a demo. And so among the things that you can see here is this user's total count of comments. So in the set of comments that we've gathered for this demo, this user had contributed about 578. This is just a snapshot of Washington Post data from I think a couple of months. So it's not this user's entire commenting history. You can see the number of replies that she has received. You can see the total number of replies that they've written, the percentage of comments that are replies. She's not been community flagged very often, just once. You can look at her activity. This is always the most fun part of this. Okay, hey, not so bad. If this was not Washington Post data that was cleaned up for presentation purposes, you would be able to see the user's avatar here. We also have a section that we're still looking to define a bit called notes. This is a space where we think that moderators could leave information about users, such as, I contacted this user at this point, or this is a user who submitted a photo and we used that photo for this project. Some publishers that we've shown this to have suggested that this might be a spot where we could have a timeline. So something that shows interactions over time with this user. So, this user received an email about this, whether it was an email saying, hey, you're doing a great job, or an email saying, hey, you violated our discussion policy and here's how.
Well, even I think any points of contact with somebody, because they view, a news organization as a single entity, even though, at least for larger organizations underneath the hood, you have all these different desks that don't always talk to each other and so on. And so you don't want to have the thing where on Monday they get, contacted by one desk, and then on Tuesday a totally different desk, or multiple reporters even working on the same story, which has never happened before.
Oh, never.
But I think the thing that's sort of fascinating about this, and the real opportunity or goal, is that with the way that we've structured this and the sort of way that people can add their own filters to this, it should be possible for you to answer any question you have about finding the right people within your community for basically any kind of reporting or sort of like collaborative tasks.
Yeah.
And that can be hard news. That can be finding people who have some level of expertise around, something happening in Syria, and that could be either because they've put some of that kind of stuff in their profile, which some people do, but more likely that they're, through linguistic analysis and things like that, they're using words that connote some amount of authority on the topic, or, other people are upvoting their comments that way. So I think what we're trying to do over time, these filters right now are very tactical, right? It's like you can be very precise. I think in working with other news organizations as well, what we want to do is make those much sort of higher level and more user-friendly, right? So that it's like, find me experts. Find me people who have a personal experience, around this. Find the people who have been sort of committed to talking about this topic over a long period of time. Find the people who are funny, essentially.
Right.
You think about, we've been doing a lot with television recaps on our site. So you know, I think most new shows on air right now, you know, we're writing some kind of recap about. And there are these communities forming in the comments, right? I mean, people sort of like to talk to each other about this kind of stuff. And so being able to sort of understand authority over time, sort of based on the quality of the comments themselves, not just the you know, the sort of upvotes or recommends or things like that, is also a way to make sure that you're bringing a good representative set of voices, you know, into any sort of discussion. If one of the TV editors wanted to convene, you know, some sort of discussion with a dozen of those, this tool helps us make sure that, you know, we're able to make sure that that is, you know, gender balanced and diverse, as opposed to just relying on sort of the data that's visible on the site, where in our case, you know, 2/3 of our comments are from men, and those are similarly the ones that get upvoted as well. So it can sort of help with that dimension and make sure that you have a representative conversation as well.
Well, right, and the idea to highlight, the ability to highlight, you know, new and different voices to discover people with talent. You know, one of the things that we'd both love to be able to do is to say to journalism students when they ask the question, you know, how do I break into this business? Instead of giving the usual answer, which is, well, it's kind of a little bit of luck and a little bit of elbow grease and a little bit of who you know, to be able to say, you can just go to the Washington Post or the New York Times and start writing to us. And if you have talent, we'll find you. And so that you'd actually be able to get a job at the Washington Post or the New York Times based on the fact that you come to us and you write things and you write well, or you take photos and you take those well, or you create videos and you're good at that, or graphics, or coding, or, you know, what have you, that there's a means for us to be able to solicit these contributions at scale. So with our tool, so all of this audience knowledge is well and good, what do you do with it? And so that's one of the next pieces that I'll show you here. Once you create searches using the filters, you're able to save those searches. And in effect, what you're saying is, find me users who are like this. And so here are some examples. Say you're looking for high quality commenters in politics. That's an easy one, right? So we have a sample recipe here for what you might want to look for. I might tweak that recipe just a bit. If what you can do with this tool is look for different metadata from your CMS. So to be able to say, okay, find me commenters in the politics section, so we're able to bring that in. So find me people who have commented in politics. You may want to look at their ratio of moderator delete actions. So, you know, have that be very low, you know, so moderators don't delete their comments very often. And you would look for other things that are sort of marks of quality. If you have a highlighting paradigm, have this person's comments been highlighted in the past? If you're looking at user feedback, user likes, user shares, if there's a paradigm of following users, all of the kinds of things that show that there is quality in this user's contributions, and on the other side, that this user hasn't run afoul of your discussion policy. Another example is trolls on a particular author, and we've picked my poor colleague Abby Phillip out of a hat. I think it's because her name begins with AB, and she was at the top of the queue. But you could look for potential trolls on a user. So we're able to take the metadata from the Washington Post CMS and look for articles written by Abby, and then look for people who may have been contributing to a trolling problem if one existed. So we would look for things like a high number of moderator deletes. We would look for a high number of community flags. We would look for if you have a paradigm of muting or ignoring users, that this is a user who's been muted or ignored quite a bit. So different criteria that show that this user has not been performing well within the system, because both staff members and users have shown through their actions that this user is perhaps violating the discussion policy. The actions that we could take on this, for example, so each of these two items, and the third one that I'll tell you in a second, can connect to actual practical actions on your site. What I might want to do on the Washington Post with high-quality commenters in politics is take the contributions from those commenters and highlight them, move them up within a comment thread. when you're able to do that, when you're able to find your most valuable users, you unlock potential that you didn't have access to before. You can, A, reward those users for their valuable contributions over time. Say, hey, as the news organization, we see you, we value you, and we're showing you that through our actions. You could connect them with reporters and help make that case to reporters that their time is well spent here. You can show to other users, this is what our organization sees as a comment worthy of highlighting. And you can flip the paradigm. You can create a new goal for users. When each of us walks into a party or a gathering, we have that moment, right, where we kind of take the temperature of the room and we understand what it is we are expected to do in that space. Commenters do the same thing when they come into your site. If they walk into a pie fight, they're likely to pick up a pie. If they walk into a reasoned discussion, they'll contribute reasonably. They'll contribute thoughtfully. And so that's one of the things that you can do here. And also, this is also quite important, you can create a valuable reading experience for your users. And again, I would say look at your analytics. You would be surprised by the number of people who read your comments, and you would be surprised by how loyal they are. These are your most loyal users. If you have a subscription or membership scheme, I'll wager that the users who are a part of that, who are your members or subscribers, are the ones who are reading your comments, and they're doing it pretty regularly. The last one that I'll show, on trolls on an author. What you might be able to do there would be to either send to moderators this list of users and say these users might be performing poorly within the system, you should take a look at it. But let's say that this wasn't trolls on Abby Phillip. Let's say that this was fans of Abby Phillip, and I'm sure that there are quite a few of those. She's a great writer. Then you could take all sorts of other types of actions. So you could send a note to those users when Abby's next story goes up. Or you could send to Abby a message on Slack or via email when one of those users has contributed. So you could create means that are scalable to be able to connect your readers with your journalists.
Yeah. And I think to Greg's point about this being a main course without an appetizer, the appetizer is obviously one of the appetizers. It could be multiple appetizers. It could be like one of those 3-hour dinners I've been having here.
We're taking a page from your book.
Yeah. Is having some sort of dashboard, right, to make this information more accessible to reporters and editors as well, right? So you can see the home screen of this sort of being an overall sort of health check or almost like a chart beat of actual people on your site and the behaviors that they have, and maybe people who've moved from essentially one category into another because they've had 60 comments in the last 60 days or things like that. So we know that they're really hooked and engaged at this point. But another way that we're building this is to be able to take all of the analysis that's happening inside of this tool and be able to plug it into other tools. So if you already have an in-house analytics tool or something maybe that you built on top of Google Analytics, or you want to send a daily email to every reporter who had a story yesterday to say, here are the sort of 5 people who contributed the most to the conversation around your article and things like that. You can take the data out of this as well and figure out what you need to do in your organization to really make contributors a part of the ongoing conversation in your newsroom. That could also be a totally different direction with any sort of customer relationship management software you have of thinking about a year from now when you call up because your paper wasn't delivered or it was wet or something, and the person on the other end of the phone knows not only that you've been a subscriber for 20 years, but that you're an active contributor to the politics section, and so they know they're dealing with someone who's highly engaged on the site every single day and is willing to do, is able to do more to recognize that and reward it as well.
Yeah. So how can you get involved? How can you help us? We have a slide that will pop up here behind me that has all of our details, how to reach us. Our website is coralproject.net. Please join our community. This is where people who are interested in this space can talk with each other, and there are experts from around the world and who are having conversations in this space. It's great to read.
It's a community.
Yeah. It's so meta it hurts, but it's a lot of fun. That's at community.coralproject.net. You can find us on Twitter at Coral Project. We have a newsletter. Guaranteed one animated GIF per newsletter, chosen by our very own Andrew Lasofsky and Sadat Harry. That's at tinyletter.com/coralproject. And if coding is your thing, you can join us on GitHub. We are at github.com/coralproject. Just a couple last points before we go to your questions. One of the things that we really want to make clear is that there are so many valuable users that are hidden in your comments already. They are trying to engage with you. They want to engage with you, and for those of you that have the time and strategic headspace to do it, it is in your best interest to find them and talk to them and cultivate relationships with them. One of I think the biggest challenges in moderation, one of the ways that we as an industry are doing it wrong, is that we spend so much time on the worst actors within our system. And we should be spending the time cultivating relationships with the best ones. And there are so many good ones. And I would also say that the number of people who are actual trolls, who want to come in and disrupt your conversations, are smaller than you think. The real problem is that this sort of pervasive hitch in the conversational flow that's existed on our sites. The conversation hasn't been structured in the way that we want it, and we have the opportunity to change that. And I think, again, if there's one point that I would want to stress the most, it's have a strategy. Think about these spaces. Think about these users. How would you want to talk with them? What kind of relationship do you want to cultivate with them? In an age, in a world where news organizations are becoming more anonymized, right? Our users are coming in through social media. Our users, in some cases, aren't coming in anymore. They're consuming our content through distributed means. So it's becoming easier and easier to not know whether the article you're reading came from the New York Times or the Washington Post or whomever. So it's, I think, absolutely critical to our business to think about what distinguishes us. And I think one of the things that can distinguish us is how each of our publications connects with its audience.
Yeah. Well, one last thing I'll say is, a lot of the success of this really hinges on reporters and other people in the newsroom being the other half of the conversation, and that's something that happens very infrequently in newsrooms today, I think in large part because it's seen as like yet another thing I have to do in this digital era. Why can't we just go back to like filing copy, over the phone, and being able to like go out drinking after work? Right. And although that does still happen.
It does.
Yeah. But I think some of my optimism on this front is you look at something like Twitter, and Twitter being around for a couple of years before reporters really got into the mix, and then in a very short window of time, many reporters all getting on board with it. In large part because the first one saw it as a competitive advantage, and sort of the competition among reporters meant that everyone else sort of got involved as well. And so I think sort of gaming it a little bit where, the first reporters that you can find in your newsroom who see this as some kind of competitive advantage, that there's actually a time savings element to engaging with your community, provided sort of the technology keeps the trolls away, and things like that, makes the reporting better. And you get enough reporters, I think, to get on board with that and really sort of demonstrate that. Everyone else will follow. Yeah. And then you do have a newsroom that is much more engaged with their readership. Yeah. So it is, like, we've seen it happen in the last several years. So it is, I think, possible on this front as well.
Oh, indeed. And yeah, and we're creating tools that we hope will help news organizations scale this work. But tools alone won't do the job. There needs to be strategy, and there needs to be a full newsroom approach to this. And we think that we really can change this space and make it something that helps improve and enliven our journalism. So thanks very much for listening to us, and we will take your questions if you have them. Yeah, in the back.
Do you have a microphone? No. Just shout.
Oh, no, there is a microphone.
There we go.
Here it comes. Hi there.
My name is Maaike. I am an editor for The Correspondent in the Netherlands. Actually, this week we also launched a similar system at our platform. The main difference between the Coral project and our system is that we let our journalists curate the content.
Mm-hmm.
What is the added value of having a moderator in your eyes?
I mean, I think journalists can be moderators, and moderators can be journalists. If I could wave a magic wand and get reporters at the Washington Post basically to do exactly what you're doing at the Correspondent, I'd do it. I would actually urge all of you to learn Dutch and go and look at the Correspondent and see what they're doing, see how they're curating communities. It's fascinating work. They're living it. And because the way that you guys structure it, you know, each article that you write is the beginning of a conversation, and sometimes the continuation of one, right?
Yeah, actually, and that's my second question. I don't know if you also want to answer, but
I think quickly. So, you know, for us, at least right now, we pre-moderate everything that goes on our site, and so part of it's just logistics. But I think watching and working with our community moderators over the past 5 years that I've been at the Times, I've been really impressed with how, you know, they've turned that into a craft of really being able to make, I think, very well-informed decisions that are always respectful to the reader, basically wanting to try to find a way to let the comment exist on the site. And there's a lot of gray area, you know, to make sure that, you know, even if it's a somewhat controversial opinion, so long as it doesn't fall into, you know, obviously like hate speech or things like that, that it should be able to be expressed. And so I do think, at least in certain topics maybe, this is I think how it works for us. Most main news stories are handled by the professional moderators. We do have other sort of soft sections and sort of like lighter stuff where the reporters and other people on the desks are doing that themselves. So I think we're probably moving more into that kind of hybrid model.
And in the interest of more voices, as we were talking about, maybe we could follow up with you for the second question, and because we have time for just one more.
yes, fine, we can talk after.
Great, thanks so much. One more question. Yeah. Right there in the white shirt, the microphone is coming your way.
Thank you. Bas Mesters from a J school in the Netherlands, Windesheim. I have a question about, you were talking about this will be a kind of safe space where trolls can't get in. But my question is this safe public space also a free public space? If it is, if you get in as a writer and you have to give all your data to the New York Times and to the Washington Post.
Incorrect.
Huh?
No, so I mean, one of the things that, let me answer that part of it, and if you have more, to be very clear, as open source software, each publisher installs it themselves. And the sort of all the privacy policy aspects of this are sort of part of your site. So,
Okay. Yeah.
There's no sort of hosting model where we then sort of have access to the data or anything like that, either as our own organizations or as the Coral projects.
Right.
But you have the same problem as you have in the real society, you know?
That's right.
When you want to create safety, you have to give up some privacy. And this is the same dilemma that you are creating. Did you think about that? And did you have the idea to give, to open the data, the metadata also to the public?
That's interesting. So I think first on the sort of the privacy aspects, one of the things that is really, I think, important to this system is that there be some kind of sort of set of flexible policies. So first of all, in the technology itself, we're not baking sort of those sort of one set of privacy policies into this, recognizing that in different countries, in different societies, there are different needs, so that some of that configuration is on the part of the individual publisher, and that will be flexible. Some of where we've had a lot of success, particularly around crowdsourcing, on sensitive topics, is making clear that we are, exactly what information we're asking for. It's not tied to your registration profile. You don't have to be a sort of a registered user of the New York Times to contribute. Sometimes we need some kind of contact info for follow-up, but we sort of try to customize that to the nature of the reporting. And so I think as a system, it needs to be flexible to be able to do that. So maybe regular comments and you having a sort of public persona on a site requires some kind of registration information, and there is, you know, as you saw, like the sort of like activity log. But the same system should be able to accommodate you happening to be the same person, but essentially with a different record that is anonymized and not attached to your registration record if you're providing something, you know, a personal story about a healthcare experience or things like that. So I think we need to make sure that that's baked into the technology the right way to be flexible.
It's quite a challenge.
Yeah.
As your first project is called Trust.
Yes.
That's right. Yeah. So it's a challenge we're excited to take on, and we hope that all of you will help us join us online for that. Thank you very much for joining us here. Please don't leave without taking some of our stickers. They're right here on the table, and if you'd like to talk with us after the session, we'll clear out to let the next session happen, but we'll stay out in the hallway. So again, thank you very much.
Great. Thanks.